how do we think the government have handled the virus so far? And just to state to Harry and to Mark, Mark, if you would like to share your opinion first, and then I will take time to share mine, and then Harry will share his, and then the debate will get going. So Mark, over to you.
Well, apart from the Cummings incident, which has put a massive damper on whatever the government is done, and it's completely overshadowed whatever the government's done. I think they've handled it as well as they can. I mean, with all the protective equipment and stuff, that should have been kept up to date way before the Tories were in government. And basically, everyone's slating what Boris is doing, but would any other party do any better?
Very good point. That is a very good point. So I feel I could counter your argument in many ways, and we'll get on to debating whether they've done well or not. But first, I feel I have to say that this week's news has been interesting, which has just proved our point that we're continually making about incompetence in the current government. And can I just remind everybody, in case you may have forgotten, they run our bloody country. In a week that has seen Boris Johnson forget his own social distancing rules that he put in place, he attended an indoor carpentry session without a face mask, which is illegal, and without showing any sign of social distancing, which just goes to prove that our current government is a complete and utter shambles, and possibly one of the worst in a lifetime. We are now seeing that a second lockdown isn't out of the question, which of course means economic disaster and the failure of many small businesses and football clubs, such as my own, or mine and my dad's own Plymouth Argyle. And this couldn't be helped because nobody saw a second wave, apparently. I do have an inside scoop, however, and this is a big one. So when Mr. Johnson resigns, which is tipped to be sooner rather than later, his career change has been confirmed. He is currently taking bookings as Shambles the Clown, guaranteed to make every party a laughingstock, not just the Conservatives. I do have to say, however, both Harry and I have no political agenda against the Conservative Party, and I certainly feel that, as Mark stated, if Jeremy Corbyn were elected in December, he would have been as incompetent as Boris Johnson, and I feel we'd be in the same boat now. Whereas if Keir Starmer was in charge of Labour at the time, it may have been a different kettle of fish. But this situation isn't politics anymore. It's sheer incompetence. Why do we have to sit around and watch countries around us, including Scotland and Wales impose hard lockdown restrictions, including a zero COVID stance, while we are making soft restrictions to tackle the virus. And we're not considering the implications of the future. The restrictions that we're putting in place now could potentially see us going into a third wave of the virus. We're not going to see the virus die. We as a country are being made to be a laughingstock. And personally, I thought after Brexit was finished with, I thought we were done. We were done as the laughingstock. But we are being made to be a laughingstock with pathetic, useless rules that even politicians who put them into place feel they don't have to follow. We can pinpoint where the trust was lost, and that was the Dominic Cummings incident where he travelled to Barnard Castle despite showing signs of COVID and despite being in a hard lockdown situation. And frankly, this whole pandemic has been absolutely shameful.
Yeah, right. Well, carrying on that line then, really, I could have selected a plethora of examples to illustrate my point of view. But luckily this week came along, and I'm just going to focus solely on this week because we've seen three absolutely catastrophic events take place for this government. So firstly, we found out earlier on in the week that Parliament bars are exempt from the 10 p.m. curfew. And that came as a bit of a shock. But for me, it's the double standards. You know, in the real world, you would be fined, these hospitality businesses would be fined and shut down if they were caught after 10 p.m. serving alcohol or drinks. So there was a huge outcry about it, and the government then said, oh no, Parliament bars are only going to serve food after 10 p.m. They're not going to serve alcohol. But normal bars and restaurants in the hospitality sector can't do that. If they serve food after 10 p.m, they would be shut down and fined. So this is inexplicable double standards. We then find midway through this week that Boris doesn't know his own rules. In an interview with the BBC about the restrictions that were imposed in the northwest because of a spike in COVID, Boris explained that the rule of six only applied to indoor settings, whereas we all know that, and the official guidance says that all settings it applies to, so outdoor and indoor settings. So he doesn't even know his own rules. So not only do we have a government that are exempt from their own rules, but they don't understand them either. And then finally, we had the video of Boris in the carpentry workshop with no social distancing and no mask. I have to condemn the others in the room as well, because they weren't doing it either. But do they not understand that lives are at stake here? And their reckless behaviour could cost lives. This is why I'm so angry about it, because lives are at stake. This is a pandemic, and this week has really shown their incompetence, their hypocrisy, and corruption, quite frankly. And something's got to shift. You cannot have a government that are setting out rules and restrictions in a pandemic and in a public health crisis where the rules don't apply to them, and then expect the public to comply and trust that government. It's just never going to work, and it's not working. You only have to go outside the front door and look around you to see that people are not following the rules anymore. And the trust, as you said, in the government, ever since Dominic Cummings, you can argue what you like, but that is the point at which public opinion changed. And ever since then, it's gone down and down. And this week, I think, has tipped it over the edge. And there's no worse position for a government to be in than if you lose the trust of the people. And that's exactly what's happening. And the people aren't going to listen to any more restrictions anymore. They have no authority anymore. people are just not going to listen. And I just want to reinforce the point that you made about the fact that I've been very critical of the government throughout the crisis. I've made no secret of that. I've just given my views. I've said it how it is. And it's not anything to do with political bias. Nothing to do with it at all. As I've said, I'm probably more right-wing than left-wing in my views. So it's nothing to do with that. It's irrelevant. As you said, this is a matter purely of incompetence. And we are seeing, they have demonstrated time and time again throughout the crisis. The facts are all there. We have one of the worst death rates in the world. We have one of the worst hit economies in Europe. We have these stupid rules in place now. And then we find out this week that the rules don't matter to the government because they're somehow higher than everyone else. I'm telling you now, the public won't stand for it. They're not going to stand for this, and people are furious. And Boris has got to go. We can't continue with a government that has no authority in a pandemic and a crisis as serious as this. So he's got to go. And that's all I have to say.
I completely agree with you. While we open up the floor now for debate, I completely agree with you in the fact that the only thing Boris can do to maintain any dignity that he has is to resign. The only problem is, who is going to want the job of Prime Minister under a Conservative Party or under any party, because of the mess of Brexit, because we've seen recently that the European law has been broken for Brexit, for how the coronavirus pandemic has been handled. Nobody is going to want to take charge of the country because of the mess that we're in.
Yeah, absolutely. It's I don't know what's going to happen, but I feel that there may be a vote of no confidence at some point, because more and more Tory MPs are speaking out about not only their annoyance about the COVID crisis, but because of Brexit. We've seen Theresa May stand up and say she cannot support the amended deal. When you're losing the trust of high-profile MPs of your own party like that, it's not a good sign, is it? And at some stage, I think there's going to be a vote of no confidence. But you know, this is only speculation at this point. You can't say.
I was highly critical of Mrs. May.
Yeah.
I think everybody was. But personally, I believe that if she were still in power, I feel she would have handled this a lot better than Boris, because she was very much like Margaret Thatcher, and she
tried to be.
She tried very much to be like Margaret Thatcher, and she didn't take any hassle off of anybody. And we saw that with Brexit. And I think, unfortunately, Brexit was what broke the woman and made her resign. But I think if she were given this task of handling a pandemic of this stature, she would have given her cabinet strict instructions on what they had to do. She would have followed her rules. She would have known what her rules were. I just feel she was a better Prime Minister than Boris Johnson will ever be, and she would have handled this a lot better than Boris will ever handle this situation.
Just to bring Mark in again, I was noting down some things as he was speaking, and one of the things you said was, would any other party do any better? And all I have to say to that is, look at New Zealand and what they did, and how they are a similar situation. They are an island, and they have control of this, and they are practically back to normal life. And look at the mess we're in. So, you know, it is possible that another party could have actually got a handle of this, as New Zealand have demonstrated.
Yeah, but the problem is when Boris took over, all the supplies of PPE weren't kept up to date. So, I mean, you look at that, and that's put on his shoulders straight away and makes him look.
I have to say that in your opening statement, you said that before the Conservative government were in place, the PPE wasn't updated.
Yeah.
But the Conservative Party have been in power for 10 years. So if the correct PPE hasn't been in place, then the country's in a worse situation than we think it is.
Yeah, but that comes down to the leaders that you've had before. I mean, you've also had Labour in charge.
Not for 10 years. Not for at least 10 years.
Yeah, but what would have happened if this happened 10 years ago? We'd be in exactly the same boat as we are now.
Well, you're saying that
no one actually expected anything like this to happen.
No, I get that. I get that no one anticipated it was going to happen. But how do you explain the fact, this is another absolute fiasco, that they discharged lots of elderly people from hospital without checking if they were negative and threw them back into care homes and let an epidemic spiral out of control in care homes? How do you justify that?
Well, there is no justifying it.
Exactly.
I have to say, both of you agreeing on Mark's statement that nobody saw this coming.
Well, they didn't. Everyone was taken off guard, is what I would say. And it's not an excuse; it's just a fact that everyone was.
Everybody saw it coming. Everybody saw it grow in China, and everybody saw it make its way through Europe, through Italy, through Spain, through France, and finally to us. Why were we so unprepared for that?
I think the answer is we were slower than everyone else. Everyone was shocked by it and didn't know how to react. But we waited and watched everyone else do what they did, and then delayed and delayed and delayed until it was too late. And
we were late going into lockdown, into a proper lockdown, where we didn't have the appropriate PPE.
Like I've said to you before, Sam, the problem is Boris is getting all this information from his advisors and everything else that he can only do with the information that he's given.
Well, in that case, I know Dominic Cummings is his main advisor, isn't he? Or he is one of his main advisors. I think if his advisors are giving him information to go into lockdown late, to not be fully prepared, then there's only one thing, and that is to get rid of the advisors that he has and get proper advisors in who know what they're doing. Get proper cabinet ministers in who know what they're doing and know the rules that are in place and aren't afraid to follow the rules, because they are setting an example to the rest of Britain. When we are seeing a government that keeps their parliament bars open after 10 o'clock, despite telling everyone else that after 10 they have to go home. I constantly refer to this because it makes me laugh. Hunting. The rule of 6 doesn't apply to hunting. Why? That makes no sense.
I have no explanation.
When they are making rules that make them exempt from the proper rules, nobody is going to trust them. Nobody is going to listen to what they say, which is just going to make the pandemic 10 times worse.
But the problem is, even before this, people weren't listening. With the first lockdown, you know yourself, people weren't listening at all.
They were to start with.
Now, down here, they weren't. we had a heat wave. People packed Whitsun Beach.
Yeah.
And you think, surely people have got common sense.
Yeah, I do agree that it is partly the public's fault as well, because there's no doubt about it that the members of the public have been completely stupid and ignorant and have blatantly ignored the rules and become very complacent over the summer, which is the video that I posted earlier on in the summer on this channel, telling people not to get complacent because this has not gone away. So, you know, but to say that this is, it's not solely because of the general public. It is primarily a government issue here.
But, I mean, if people actually use their common sense...
Yeah, I get that.
I mean,
it would help.
I mean, we had a case of COVID down here a couple of weeks ago. A group of friends come back off holiday, decided to go out drinking, and one of them had COVID. And you're thinking, really?
It is a terrible, terrible situation. Do you have any more questions? Does anyone have any more?
I was going to make a comment, and my mind has gone blank. So I think I'm done now.
Nothing new there, Sam.
Okay. One thing I'm just going to finally say is that I whilst, you know, they clearly made mistakes in the first wave, and they saw what was going on around the world and what other countries were doing. And you know, the first wave was a disaster, and there's nothing they could do about that. But whilst we were going through the summer and the cases were going down, the government had time to prepare themselves, reflect on what they did in the first wave, and look at what they did wrong and how they can best prepare for the second wave. And they can look at other countries like New Zealand and places like that that have successfully handled this. Why did they not prepare themselves adequately to not make the same mistakes again with this imminent second wave coming, which everyone could have seen coming?
I've just remembered what I was going to say on complacency. I feel that people were always being complacent during the first main lockdown. I say the first because we know that there is the potential for a second, especially over winter. I feel the complacency has grown more and more as we ease out of lockdown, because Boris and the government are trying to push, or were trying to push, everyone going back to work, children going back to school, and everyone is thinking, great, life is going back to normal, pubs are open, schools are open, work is open, everything's back to normal. But now that complacency had kicked in, those rules of pubs having to close at 10 o'clock, harder lockdown restrictions, those are coming into place. You have to work from home if you can. Those are coming into place because people were taking rules and being completely stupid with them. So yes, we can blame the government. We can say the government haven't handled the virus or the pandemic very well. But it's also about how people are taking the rules, how people are seeing how the government are producing the rules, and the complacency of whether people are saying, okay, this is serious, we need to take this seriously, and which I thought people were doing when 43,000 people were dying and thousands were dying per day. Or you can be the type of person that says, sod this, I want life to return to normal. I'm not being told what I can do, what I can't do, and so people need to sort their ideas out and listen to the government. The government
But
are
the
in
problem
charge.
is, why would they listen to the government now? When, if you're saying the issue here is public complacency, how does it help when you have the Prime Minister and members of the government blatantly flouting the rules that they've set out themselves? You know, if we're saying that the problem here is public complacency, this is only going to make it worse, which backs up my point that the government are setting a terrible example here, and it's not acceptable.
Why should it be one rule for one and another rule for another?
It's just making matters worse. If they're blaming the public, they're not doing themselves any favors by breaking the rules themselves.
Why do I have to meet 6 people for a Sunday roast, and yet Boris can go out with 7 friends hunting? It makes no sense whatsoever.
But the problem is, no matter what government or politicians or whatever you have, it's always been one rule for one and one for another. I mean, you look at the budget, spirits never go up, but tobacco and everything else does go up.